there was somebody that wrote an article that I just posted about their opinion that Fire Walk With Me is David Lynch's masterpiece, which is odd because, critically and audience-wise, reviled at the time of its release.
Yeah, that when it came out, that came and went very quickly. I mean...
And as has happened with so many movies, now it's being reassessed, and it seems to be rising to the top of Lynch's resume. But the article says that the Fire Walk With Me is a very cynical movie, and somebody responded on our Twitter to the article and says, I don't think Lynch is completely incapable of making a cynical film. This article has no idea what makes Fire Walk With Me so great. Fire Walk With Me shows real pain and horror, and is deeply sad and human. I think you can be human and cynical at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think it is a cynical movie, and I think that there is a salvation at the end for Laura Palmer, but
right.
I do think it's cynical about human nature, and I think it ended up that way in the editing room because they made it a lot more jokey. They filmed a lot more scenes for the movie that were relied on humor, and they cut all that stuff out when they went to the editing room. So it became a real horror film in the editing room. And this guy is right. It's deeply sad, and I do feel like it's deeply human with the Laura Palmer character. But I do think it's still it's one of his most cynical movies. I don't like directors that are opaque just for the sake of being opaque.
Right.
There has to be something, and I think this is what differentiates the regular filmmaker from the artist. There has to be something that they're transmitting, some sense, some tangible sense of something. Even at his most opaque in Fire Walk With Me, I feel like Lynch is giving you some feeling of this other world that really gets into your marrow, you know. It's so easy to be opaque and people to say, oh, he's brilliant, he doesn't spell anything out. People don't stop to realize, well, is there anything really to spell out? You know, is he creating a world here, or is he just being confusing just for the sake of being confusing? You know, but I don't think that Lynch was successful with Inland Empire, but in creating that world. Mm-hmm. But I do think he was in Fire Walk With Me. And I have no problem with someone suggesting that that's his masterpiece. No, it's not as cohesive a story as a Blue Velvet or an Elephant Man, but I think it's a very specific world, and I do think it's the most human movie, filled with such... I think it takes the deep pain and sadness of an Elephant Man, transplants it in another very specific world.
I love Lost Highway. Am I the only one who loves Lost Highway? No,
yeah.
I like that film a lot. Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for that. I love Lost Highway. I mean, Mulholland Drive and Eraserhead and Blue Velvet will always be the tops for me. Oh, Blue Velvet is the one to beat. I mean, that is the masterpiece for me. And
Lost Highway is one of the few movies that he actually semi-explained. He let out a big clue when he was talking about it. He said, look, the whole thing started with O.J. The fact that O.J. probably killed his wife and Ron Goldman. And then you see him, after he got off, you see him on the golf course, like waving at cameras and smiling and living a perfectly normal life. It was that sense of duality that inspired him to start writing Lost Highway.
I've never heard that quote. That's very fascinating. No, that's a very interesting take. But that always reminds me, if you're a comedian and you have to explain a joke, that's not good.
It no longer works. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, Shane Carruth has done interviews, and he said, look, I don't want to talk about meaning. Lynch always says the same thing. Of course, Malick doesn't talk.
God bless him.
The best Malicks, I get the sense of I get a sense of something from Malick too. I mean, Tree of Life. Even if I don't understand something like Jessica Chastain's character all of a sudden flying, levitating, that doesn't make practical sense. But I can understand it in the dream of the movie, and that's how her son looks to her.
Yeah, I mean, if we start,
there's cinematic
doing
poets.
That.
I mean, there's cinematic poets. That's the thing. They're just
no. You're right.
And they, you don't have poets going through each, people who write poetry, actual poetry.
Yeah,
going
Stanley
through and explaining every single line of their poetry. I mean, how boring would that be?
That would be awful. No, but you're right, though. Poetry is the right example because that's what movies are. Really, movies and poetry have a lot in common. And, that was Stanley Plumley, a famous poet, told me when I took his class, movies and poetry are almost the same thing. And to explain them would be disastrous.
Yeah.
I mean, just the nature of watching a movie is a dream state. It's a dream world. So why can't it play within the boundaries of a dream? Which means there are no boundaries. As long as you remain true to the world that you're creating, you can do anything within that world. And I think that's the freedom that we get from the best Lynch and Malick movies.
Mm-hmm. And even going so far as going back to Antonioni and
I mean, going back to his films, I mean, oh my God, I mean, and Bergman for that matter, or Fellini, I mean,
which is just to say that the best filmmakers have a poetic quality about them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, majorly poetic for Antonioni, but there was a story in like The Passenger that was pretty straightforward. It was just the treatment of his treatment of it was so elusive and had such kind of patience to it that it put you in this kind of dreamy state.
There's a split in the personality in that film that happened, and then you start questioning as a viewer, and it's been a little while since I've seen the film, but I remember just questioning the reality. What's the real story here, or whatever? And I thought that was the point, because it is an Antonioni movie after all. So so you have to bridge those questions.
Should listen to Nicholson's commentary on the DVD. It's an interesting commentary because Nicholson actually owned the print of The Passenger, and then he gave it up years ago to be refurbished and re-released. So he did the commentary on the DVD. Part of it you can understand where he's talking about Antonioni's approach, but talk about opaque. A lot of the stuff Nicholson says you can't make heads or tails of. So in a way, he's a perfect actor. He's a perfect actor for a director like that, or like Kubrick. Because I've listened to him, like, I love hearing him talk, but what the fuck is he talking about? I don't know.